At 4:40 on the morning of 21st of March 1918, 6,000 German guns opened along 50 miles of front from Arras to La Fère, and by the fourth day, the British line between the Somme and the Oise had stopped being a line at all. Georg Bruchmüller's bombardment ran 5 hours, gas first, to force the masks on, then high explosive onto batteries, headquarters and telephone exchanges already mapped. Behind it came 3 armies, Otto von Billow's 17th in the north, Georg von der Marwitz's 2nd in the center, Oskar von Hutier's 18th in the south. Hubert Gough's 5th Army held about 42 miles of it with 12 infantry and 3 cavalry divisions, much of that frontage taken over from the French only weeks before and thinly wired. The fog helped the attackers, and the arithmetic finished the work. Hutier made the deepest gains, pushing across the Somme and out onto the cratered wilderness of the 1916 battlefield, while Gough's front came apart from Saint-Quentin southward. What the British were conducting by 25th of March was not a defense, but a sequence of retirements, each one shorter of artillery and further from its dumps than the last. Behind the retreat lay a junction that mattered more than any village on the map. Amiens was the rail hinge of the Western Front. The Longueau marshalling yards linked the BF's lateral lines to the French system, and a German gun line east of the city would sever them. In this alternate timeline exploration, we examine what could have happened and why the real history unfolded differently. Because on the night of 25 March, the German High Command held an order in its hands that it never actually gave. In our history, Erich Ludendorff had already made his choice 2 days earlier. On the 23rd of March, he sent his 3 armies along diverging axes, the 17th toward Arras and Saint-Pol, the 2nd toward Amiens, the 18th toward Montdidier and Noyon, and prepared Operation Mars, a fresh northern blow against Arras to widen the wound. 3 directions. 1 reserve pool. The breakthrough he had bought with a fortnight's casualties was spread across a fan of objectives, none of which received enough weight to be decisive. In this timeline, on the night of 25-26 March, he does the harder thing. Mars is cancelled. The 17th Army's uncommitted reserves are subordinated to Crown Prince Ruprecht's Somme front and pushed south behind the point that is already moving, Hutier's 18th, at the boundary where the British right meets the French left. Marwitz and Hutier receive a single objective in place of 3, the Amiens rail junction and its yards. It is not a stroke of genius, it is a refusal, the refusal to reinforce a stalled attack because it is prestigious, and the decision to reinforce a moving one because it is moving. The seam between 2 Allied armies is the one place on a coalition front where neither partner's reserves arrive first. Ludendorff aims everything he has left at that seam. The consequences of that choice would prove decisive for the spring, but first the yards themselves. German infantry enter Amiens from the east and the south. The city is not stormed so much as flanked out of usefulness, with Hutier's divisions across the Avre and Marwitz pressing astride the Somme. The defense of Amiens becomes a defense with its supply lines already under observed fire. The Longueau marshalling yards are taken largely intact, too fast for demolition parties working under shell fire and without clear authority to destroy French railway property. The consequence is not the loss of a city, it is the loss of a switch. Every lateral movement between the British armies in the north and the French armies to the south had run through those yards. Without them, a division shifted from Flanders to the Oise travels by a long southwestern detour, or it does not travel at all. 2 Allied armies that had been able to reinforce each other in hours can now do so in days. The physical link between the British and French armies is cut before any political link has been forged to replace it. That sequence, infrastructure first, command arrangement second, decides what happens next. The conference at Doullens meets on 26th of March, with Amiens already going. In our history, it produced the agreement that gave Ferdinand Foch authority to coordinate Allied action on the Western Front, widened at Beauvais on 3 April to strategic direction, and completed on 14th of April when he became Commander-in-Chief. The men in that room agreed to unity because unity could still save the junction. Here they arrive after it. 2 days earlier at Dury, Philippe Pétain had told Sir Douglas Haig that he expected to be separated from the British and intended to fall back southwest to cover Paris. Haig had telegraphed London for Milner and Wilson precisely to prevent that. Now the separation is a fact on the ground rather than a fear on a map. Georges Clemenceau wants a single commander and cannot produce one, because a generalissimo is only meaningful if there is a common object to command toward, and the common object has just been taken. Pétain will not spend the French reserve retaking a junction to restore a connection he no longer believes in. His instruction from his own government is that Paris outranks the Channel, and the Paris gun has been shelling the capital since 23rd of March. Haig will not subordinate the BEF to a commander whose first order must be a retirement southeast, away from Boulogne and Calais, and away from the sea. Both positions are defensible. Together they are fatal. Doullens adjourns with liaison arrangements and no supreme command. With the hinge broken, the German command does the thing the geography suggests, rather than the thing the headlines would prefer. It does not march on Paris. Paris is 180 miles away across the Oise, with the entire French field army in front of it, and the German infantry is already outrunning its own guns and horses on the churned ground of the old Somme battlefield. Instead, the weight goes northwest. Hutier holds the southern shoulder facing the French, while Marwitz and below lever the British right rearward, each mile of pressure widening the gap between the Allies and shortening the BF's frontage against the coast. The British are not being destroyed. They are being turned, hinged back onto their own ports like a door. In April, the blow falls on the Lys, against a British line that now has no southern anchor. In our history, the Lys offensive was contained partly because Foch could feed French divisions north through the rail net. Here, there is no Foch and no net. Haig's reserves come only from Haig, and the map begins to describe an army with the sea behind it and a shrinking perimeter in front. And then comes the question that London has spent 4 years refusing to write down. The War Office and the Admiralty study the lift. The arithmetic is brutal, and it is not really about ships. Boulogne and Dunkirk can move men. The Channel is short, and the Royal Navy is intact. But a British Expeditionary Force is not men. It is thousands of guns, hundreds of thousands of horses, ammunition dumps built up over 3 years, workshops, hospitals, railways of British construction on French soil. Save the men, and you abandon the material. Abandon the material, and the force that lands in Kent is an army in name, and a crowd, in fact, unable to return for a year. And the political cost exceeds the material one. A British evacuation is the formal end of the coalition, because it tells France that the war on the continent is now France's alone. Pétain's withdrawal on Paris and a British withdrawal on the sea are the same decision made twice, and each justifies the other. The plan is drafted. Whether it must be executed depends on a calculation being made across the Atlantic. John Pershing had been sent to France under standing instruction from Washington to build an independent American army, and he had spent a year resisting Allied demands to feed American battalions into British and French divisions. Now he releases them. Regiments go piecemeal to whichever front will take them, the independent army abandoned in a fortnight of cables. About 318,000 American troops were in France by the end of March 1918. Of those, only the 1st, 2nd, 26th, and 42nd Divisions were anywhere near fit for a defensive sector, and none for an offensive. This is the pivot the whole spring turns on. The Americans are arriving in numbers that would have decided 1919, and in a condition that cannot decide the summer of 1918. Half-trained infantry without their own artillery, staffs, or transport can hold quiet ground and stiffen a line. They cannot retake a rail junction against assault divisions. Time is the only variable that matters, and it runs the wrong way. The men are coming. They are simply not yet the thing the crisis requires, and Germany's advantage is a window that closes by itself. Germany negotiates from occupied ground while its own cities go hungry, and both halves of that sentence are true at once. The terms drafted in Berlin are drawn from the map. Recognition of the Brest-Litovsk settlement signed on 3 March, a rectified western frontier, Belgium held as a bargaining asset. Indemnities to close the war loans. They are the terms of a state that believes it has won. They are also terms that Germany lacks the strength to garrison. Michael cost well over 200,000 casualties in a fortnight, and the trained assault divisions cannot be replaced in kind. Roughly 1 million German troops remain in the east on occupation and requisition duty, unavailable at home. The blockade keeps its own timetable. The turnip winter of 1916-17 is 2 years' memory, and in January several 100,000 Berlin workers walked out of the munitions plants. A gun line east of Amiens does not put bread in Berlin. The Allied blockade does not lift because a railway junction changed hands, and American mobilization does not pause because a conference adjourned, so the settlement, when it comes, is a victory in the shape of a bill. Germany holds more ground than at any point since 1914, and less capacity to hold it than at any point since 1914, and the peace it dictates from Amiens is underwritten by an army that cannot be rebuilt and a home front that is already voting with its feet. The real 26 March went differently, and the difference was almost entirely a matter of sequence. Foch received his authority while there was still a junction worth defending, and coalition command was created in the hours before the thing it existed to protect was lost. That is the narrow margin the spring of 1918 actually turned on, not the courage of the men holding the seam, but whether the decision to fight as one army was taken before or after the railway that made it possible was taken away.